Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Yeah. So when you sit still or switch off some of the input or from the external senses, the ear, the eye, nose, tongue, and physical body, you have the mind, right? So that becomes apparent, obvious, and what does it do? What's the mind consciousness? And consciousness is this drip feed of data. These things continually dripping, sight, sounds, impulses, thoughts. It's kind of dripping, sometimes flooding. And so as we contemplate that stream, with sometimes meandering, drifting, dithering around, a little fantasy, project, you find that after a while it starts to crystallize around me. Not me, but the me-ness that we experience. So it's not really a thought so much as almost an emotional gathering of a certain intensity around, and then it starts as what I am, what I was, what I wish I was, what I could be, what I'm not, and how to maybe get from being this state to being something better, or trying to shuck off the things that about me that really feel very comfortable about, kind of fidgeting and sometimes quite wounded and trapped into senses of anxiety or fear or occasionally guilt, regret, and then kind of quite pinned by it, or pinned by proliferating expectations of the future, what I will be, where I'm going to be, how I'm going to work that out. Does that happen? And kind of this me sense becomes a default that seems so obvious. Maybe we don't really question it. Of course, I'm me. I've got my life to live. Because when you look around, you see these distinctly shapes which are in kind of distinct outlines. So it's definitely there's a one of them there and one of them there, and that's a he's got a me and he's got a me and she's got a me, right? And they're all different me's, different formulations of the same thing. So we're all me's, aren't we? That's the way it would seem. But then, when you begin to kind of try to manage that experience, how kind of shifting and changing it is. It's not really doesn't crystallize anything solid, but it tends to form patterns, vortexes, like something watery that goes into whirlpools or floods or streams. So themselves are quite active, and yet a pattern, with quite a familiar pattern, and in that pattern, the vortex, the stream, the flood, whatever it is, and then the me, that me sense, if it's very mobile, it doesn't form a static static, final, fixed me. Sometimes it experiences a kind of pinned, struggling me, or it captured me, but still it's still got some, you can feel it's an energy that's shifting and pulsing and twitching and locking, and and around that it also draws in scenarios of other people and events seen from that particular position. How she was to me, what he didn't do for me, what I'm going to do about them, and what I didn't do for them that I should have done, or what I did do for her that I really shouldn't have done. So it really kind of crystallizes around a relational sense. And how many of those are really in that state? How many of those really feel very fortunate? Maybe occasionally there are bursts of, I'm really glad. But probably really I'm glad I met him, because he's a nice guy. I really admire her. How many of them are saying, you're really okay, you're a pretty nice person, you're wonderful? Anybody get that? Anybody get a sense that when they sit down, they can't stop the feeling of congratulation and admiration for themselves? It becomes irresistible. Anybody get that? Anybody find themselves kind of flooded with torrents of recognizing all the good things they've done? Anybody get that problem? Gone kind of quiet here. No hands going up. Why is it so much of it, when you step out of the details of the narrative, crystallize around something unsatisfactory, and around that pulsing nerve of discontent, dissatisfaction, incompleteness, a kind of a world of me and others starts to form, often with emotionally quite lurid and potent. There's an energy that really sharpens up and gets very intense. What will I be in the future? Oh no, insecurity. And so, as these emotions begin to erupt, body gets gripped by it. Body's getting gripped by it. Wow, who's that? What's that? Just as a kind of a phenomenon, an event experience. And the narratives can be kind of subtle. I'm really not really getting this meditation thing very clearly, or I got to kind of I can't really feel emotionally that sensitive. I'm a bit numb, or a bit kind of heady, or I'm slightly awkward, or actually something much deeper, much more poignant than that. And say when it kind of enters the world of action, doing things, you find how sweet it is just to be doing things for the sake of doing something good. Not for any reward or praise, just like enjoy the sense of good energy, generosity, caring. Something kind of beautiful about those streams of energy and intention. Without a sense of me stuck, attaching to them, just those movements of care, compassion, integrity, generosity, patience, and there's something just so kind of really kind of fulfilling about that. I notice in these processes how, when the me sense takes over, it's afflictive. When there is no me sense, it's rather, I won't say fantastic, it's just seems very right, sane, balanced, and kind of ordinary, but without a lot of this suffering and stress in it. Do you ever get that? And to feel, certainly I feel, really so blessed to be able to do some good without being great or fantastic or blameless, but just do some good. Because it just feels like it's just good stuff. And I don't claim authorship of it, or the only one, or something best about me. It's just to be able to participate in that field of goodness is a privilege. And I guard it. I guard it. I make mistakes, but I certainly want to apologize and return, because I really guard that sense. It seems to be a lifeline, and a field that's fruitful for one's own welfare and for the welfare of others. And it leads to the quelling of dukkha. And really kind of trying to almost reframe one's, in my sense, reframe one's spiritual or awakening, or whatever you call it, Dhamma practice, as a way to stay in that stream and contemplate it and steady it and calm it. Rather than, say, from the construction of meditation systems, techniques, or something like that, but actually from engaging in skillful states, and then lingering in skillful states, feeling uplifted by skillful states, and then settling into how that feels in the body, and how that can be lingered in. And actually, when one does return to the suttas, the teachings, that's the way the Buddha taught it. You don't start out meditating. You start out tuning in to skillful states and committing and doing them and relinquishing, skimming off the dreariness or the compulsiveness or the impatience or the frustration because we can't always get things done the way we want them to, or one's opinions about other people, how they're not adequate or lazy or foolish, just skimming off that stuff. And staying just in that, expanding that field, And then one notices how when there is, how what citta is affected by more default is by when something is unsatisfactory or broken or stressful or diseased or incompetent, or failing in some or another. That sign of dissonance, as it enters the heart, shakes, and this sense of anxiety, fault, guilt, blame, wrong, should be another way, and then a me sense crystallizes in that. And then the me sense tries to get out of it and explain it or justify or argue. I didn't mean that, I should be this, it's her fault after all, what's all going on here? It's trying to be good and right, and the me is not good or right. It doesn't mean there isn't any goodness, it just means the me sense, if it becomes good, it tends to be finding fault with others. I am good, I am right, I've got it clearly, and you don't have it. And so in this sense of what I call the dukkha of conditionality, that is, things do break, systems break, everything sickens, things die. Every system, including our own thought system, is subject to glitches and errors. from the computer to the movement of my thought, from the organic to the automatic to AI, it's all glitched. That's the kind of, what we say, the condition of dukkha. And then there's what we call the noble truth of dukkha, is when that condition is implanted into the heart as you. Not there is, but you are whatever, And that shift from things, manifesting the condition or the characteristic of dukkha to me, inadequate, blameworthy, whatever, and suffering. So that's when it becomes what we call the first noble truth, when this is implanted as a personal profile. It's always evident because often the personal profile itself is so cloaked and veiled in all the apparel, adornments that it generates in order to not face up to its own fallibility. So we get preoccupied, we get entertained, we kind of tend to distract a lot. Or then when also we there's a lot of self-improvement programs going on, and a strong social and individual urge to be progressive, better, up to speed, quicker, faster, more comfortable, more happy, brighter, intelligent, sharp, on the ball, but relaxed, cheerful, sociable, easygoing, and young, forever. Should be easy. Buy one of these. So this is I'm kind of exaggerating it, for dramatising it, but I think you'll get these kind of messages, And so if you're a bit kind of don't fit into that, then you're either the source of some pity or maybe contempt. Failure. So I was just noticing I was in London the other weekend and demonstrating my inadequacy because I can't understand all the apps and the digital codes and the swiping things to make doors open. I'm just kind of like a bumbling country bumpkin when it comes to these slick, instantaneous things. I'm always kind of floundering, So I sort of bluffed. Somebody gave me a room in a hotel. I kind of bluffed my way into that and managed to master how to switch the lights on and off, and felt quite pleased with myself. Because you used to have switches. When I was a boy, we had these switches on the wall. You push one. We don't have them anymore. Now I got figured out that I had this kind of like a console, this kind of stick with all these buttons on it to do something. Either change the temperature. I didn't even. I thought, no, leave that alone. Just try to find out a way to switch the television off. That's all. That's good enough. So, but then I kind of. I fell at the first oyster hurdle. So I have an oyster card, which is to get you through the underground, where you slap this little plastic card and you swipe it on a kind of a disc that's on by these turnstiles. So you just do that. Okay, right. How do you do this? So just so somebody's with me, so just kind of put your card on that button, please. So put the card on it. If I did it right, I pushed the card, and then the door locks. And a little sign comes up. You've already paid for this. So what's happened? So I did it again. I pushed, even more mindful. very carefully pushed the card onto it and then adjusted it a little bit to make sure it really was snuggled in properly. See, they says, then the guy who's with me says, "No, Bhante, that registers as touching it 3 times. So the machine gets confused. What you have to do is swipe it and dash through the turnstile." So, oh, right, okay, here we go. Swipe, dash. I got through the gate, and I got to the other end, and okay, here we go, here's another one. I swiped and dashed through because I didn't know how to be not mindful. I didn't know how to dash, but of course a Londoner is on dash, rush program all the time. So us country folk, they kind of go at walking speed and open doors with handles on them, can't cope with this. And there's this feeling of bumbling idiot that comes over me every time I come into most of the urban life and so forth, bumbling idiot. And that me. And I kind of notice it and I find it quite funny. Because often you go to some venue and you say a few things that seem kind of ordinary, but it's, "Oh, Bhante, wonderful." You didn't say anything special. "Oh, it's very great, thank you so much, so grateful." And so you come out feeling, okay, I guess I'm okay. And then you can't even open the gate on the Underground Railway. That's this lovely kind of, rise and fall of the ego. And how I don't find that though I do get, people do say some very nice things about me, but I don't really quite kind of get it. Because it just seems one is sort of telling the truth, that's all, with wish to help people. It doesn't seem that great. But the failings, certainly those grip. So a lot of my practice is just kind of contemplating the sense of self and measuring, So this morning I had I thought, okay, going to the morning, today is Saturday, we have the morning meeting where everybody gets together, and then there's some diary announcements, a general program for the week is presented, and so, all right, got to get there on time. 7 o'clock. So I've got to wash this cup. So I get this cup washed on time. And then my hand was crash. There goes the cup. Oh God! How did that happen? Wet hands, wet cup. Trying to wash. How do you wash a cup without getting your hands and the cup wet? That's a koan, right? All you have to do is take it slowly and carefully hold the mug. Don't be in a hurry. Don't grip it too hard, but just grip it hard enough, flexibly enough to be able to wash the cup. Without that, smash. I just kind of saw this cup, which I had for about 10, 12 years, this mug. I like to think I look after what people give me. All these are requisites, it's a mug, whatever it is, I don't like to see these things wasted. It's a feeling of this was given in faith, generous people, really look after it, because that's what I don't really care about the mug particularly, but dana, and then you have caused that to break through a lack of mindfulness. After all, this is your 50th Vassa, Bhikkhu Sucitto, and you can't wash a mug. Now actually, that's what didn't arise, which I thought was great, because that was a kind of narrative that would arise a few years ago. If I noticed there's a sense of, oh, there it is, And I remember seeing on some of these mugs written this motto, "This mug is already broken." Just looking at it was going to, the sun was going to do it sooner or later. It was going to break. It was a bit sad, because it was useful and it was given, but... And then the thought came up, now don't judge other people who break mugs. And expanding that sense. This is the slippery mug sutta. Life is a slippery mug. Don't start blaming others for handling a slippery mug and dropping it. And kind of thought, okay, thank you. And be more careful, that's all. Doesn't mean, doesn't matter, just means, okay, don't get into that hurry up. Got to get to the meeting. They're not going to they won't give you a fine if you turn up 3 minutes late. How much it's driven by the anxiety, the almost voiceless anxiety to not somehow to not upset others, to make sure you're on time, to fit into criteria. Gee, that actually nobody else really minds that much. The wish to be the perfect self. And becomes more and more evident. Tried. Not going to happen. And in this particular lifestyle and culture, there's a lot of potential for self-measurement. If you look into if you have to look at some of the suttas, you see all these people start out as some kind of thug on page 1, and by page 3 is an arahant. You're thinking, blimey, that was quick. Effortlessly shifting through these various refined mental states and arriving at some, I think, goodness me. And he's turned the page, there's another one. Well, the Buddha's kind of rolling out this amazing discourse. You get to first start somewhere you can recognise, because you always start somewhere pretty mundane. Oh yeah, I get to that. He moves it on one step, in terms of practice. You think, yeah, I get that. And then he shifts gear and it's gone. You think, where did that go? I've got to the point of he recognises, tries to live blamelessly. Yeah, I've got that. And then experiencing the bliss of blamelessness. He enters and abides in the first, and you think, I didn't quite get the bliss of blamelessness. How did that happen? Instead there came this is the rule, this is the critic, you get the Vinaya training. And once you get into that, wow, you've got a lot of hurdles. You can find yourself really fenced in with all the possibilities, the refined degree of how you can get it wrong. Some really micro pieces of behaviour. And once the mind picks up that theme of there is a perfect right way of conduct that is extremely refined, then your mind picks up, starts to spin around that, And they call it the Vinaya guilt, the Vinaya anxiety, the Vinaya fear. And certainly in my life as a Buddhist monk, I spent quite a bit of time just trying to kind of console people for You don't find fault with them, actually tell them they're not as bad as they think they are. So, well, you do avoid deliberately harming, don't you? Yeah. You do avoid swearing, oh yeah. You don't drink, no. Don't steal, no, I wouldn't steal anything. So, do you ever recognise that? Oh no, it's just what you do, isn't it? Well, not everybody does that. In fact, remarkably few people do that. And he was agonising. I remember one monk, he getting up, because he went to a doctor, NHS doctor, and the doctor went to seek some medical advice, and ended up having a conversation with the doctor. He got back, he thought, oh goodness, I've stolen that doctor's time. I was there, I've got NHS, National Health Service, appointment to see a doctor about a particular problem, and he said a few things, I got into a conversation, I stole his time by taking up his time. I'm guilty. Just ease off that. I wouldn't, for him it was real. And you think, is this really what the Buddha intended? Is this really the way the Buddha recommended, encouraged us to enter and abide in skillful states? If it's kind of crippled with fear and anxiety, is that really going to, and micro studying, fault finding, like putting that filter on everything you do in your life, is that really going to be fruitful? Do you get a bit uptight and nervous around that? Is there a way where one could, the whole process of training is to be able to, notice, in a kind of manageable frame of reference, you're not doing anything really wicked, you need to notice the irregularities of the mind intention and sort of, highlight it, flag it, so you can begin to contemplate and work with places where one's compulsive, negligent, overwhelmed with passion, irritated and so forth. Just kind of really, and then you've got to dissolve that, not through a legal process, but through a Dhamma process, which is, we've been captured, we've been seized, we've been pinned, we've been overwhelmed. Now, acknowledging that, can we open out into something less constricted, out of these patterns of self-forming, into something that feels the wave of goodness, blessing. We open into a Dhamma field, and maybe this is what that is all about. It says, for the comfort of well-behaved people, for the restraining of corruptions that do take over, to restrain them, not to never see them, but to restrain their effect, for the comfort of those who are well guided. That's a little closer to it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So we're finding, and then when the mind does get overwhelmed, and we don't necessarily recognize it, and so having some ethical or behavioural structures there to remind us, say, what are you doing? It was kind of flowing along in a default manner, fairly heedless or lack of reflection, as you touch one of these training precepts that says, hey, wake up, what are you doing? Wake up, check. That's what it does. It's not saying, you idiot, it just says, wake up. You go, oh, right. Yeah, and then you get the moment when you could begin to recognise this sankhara, this energetic pattern that has taken over. And as you get more familiar with it, you can sense it's very self-obsessive, me and mine. All of them are like that. It's self-obsessive, me and mine. They're generally about trying to get or have something, or they're generally volitional, and they're me and mine. So their attention span is what works for me, what satisfies me, how I am, and their push is towards I'm going to get, want to have something. So you check out and think, look at those two signals. The attention captured by, we say, self-obsession, or captured by the sense of self, and the intention also captured by what I want, what I be, what I'm going to have. So in that particular formation, ahankara, self-formation, you want to have that flagged, like a little alarm goes off. Uh-oh. And then rather than going into a kind of you idiot, fool, corrupt, whatever, you say there's a behaviour, there's an asava, there's a corruption that you don't normally detect unless you have some kind of system that flags it. And a system does the flagging. It doesn't punish. It just flags. It's ding. And it's a kind of reminder. And you wake up, what are you doing? Check it out. And drop. And you find you've come in, you've come out, or rather than going to another self-pattern of recrimination or whatever, I mean, my experience, practice is, if there's something to be apologised for or forgiven, you just do it. Anything, you just want to get out of that grip. And sometimes it's more or less just the act of self-remembering, wait a minute, this is not what it's all about. This is not what I need to be. This is not what I have to do. Just cut that engine. At that moment you kind of come back and you take a breath, feel your body, and you feel when you're in this obsessive state, you lose a good amount of your embodiment. You go into some kind of whirl of emotion and thought. And it's coming back into a stable body, and here we are, So, the process is one of certainly acknowledging what are called, defects, but even more than that, to be able to return to a wholeness, right? Rather than defect and then identify with the defect and proliferate around it, which can be a tendency that we go into, particularly if we're very keen to make sure that we're doing right. So then I am this, I'm a passionate person, I'm an angry person. So no, your citta is affected by these corruptions. Just get the signal and then, who are you now? You're kind of some compulsive, gripped state. And in that compulsive, gripped state, one generates a world, of self and other, of what should and was. And when you don't need to be that, like you come back into, say, open presence, you don't need to be anybody or anything. You don't need to be good or bad, or right or wrong. It's not a topic. We come into what I call the real, and the nature of the real is just open presence. It's got no colour or flavour or push to it. It's got no aim. It's just open presence, because whenever any of these kind of worlds stop or unfold, you find that you're back into that. You're in that. That's the kind of, we say, a constant, except one doesn't necessarily dwell in it. One tends to get magnetized and hypnotized by the moving and the impassioned and the wounded and the compulsive. They take over. But whenever there's a relief from that, what's that again? Open presence. And you can't do an identity around it. That's my experience. Is that, I don't know. But then, if we really focus on the changeability of things, so things, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, whether it's succeeding or failing, whether ego's getting praised or ego's getting crushed or whatever it's doing, it's not all changes, the changing nature of the sense of being and self and the world and others, all kind of shifting and changing in patterns, but changing, just focus on the change and opening to that, not disputing with it, or you get a sense of what is it, how is that knowable, how is that something that can be focused on? Clearly because the something isn't doing that. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to register it. This is just speaking in colloquial language. You could say awareness, if you like. That's got some buzz to it. But I don't even like to talk about a thing, because then it becomes a thing I've got to have or be. Or look for some validation in the sutta or the masters or something. But I just know that when there can be a dispassionate opening to change, and then returning to getting less interested, not interested but gripped and mesmerized and agonizing over and fascinated by shifting phenomena. It's a kind of openness, open presence, and that somehow or another that can almost float, because I don't find I can get in. There's no intensity in it. There's no there it is. You've got the thing. There's none of that. It's so obvious. And when I try to think of something that's important, I tend to get a bit of intensity around it. That's a really important thing to do. But that intensity, that intense focus, is a construction. And that construction is very capable of generating success, failure, right, wrong, gaining, losing, and these extremely potent measurements that trigger off a lot of reactions. And they're, after all, they're measurements, aren't they? So they're not really intrinsically, essentially valid. They're measurements, right? So if we say, if something's what's success for a Buddhist nun or monk? It probably means a state of some peace and calm. It doesn't mean winning a race or getting a diploma. So the successful monastic or samana is someone who's just kind of peaceful and non-contending. Now most people wouldn't really consider that to be much of a success. It's not something that people aim for. When we look at things like success, failure, and then the praising and blaming, we can probably recognize they're all very relative to a particular set of standards or focuses that we've generated, So she's a great cook, but she's a pathetic chess player. Well, that's a measurement dependent on a particular situation. If you're not cooking or playing chess, are you a success or a failure? What do you measure by? Certain constructed measuring sticks. Now, if we put aside the measuring sticks what we are or should be or could be. Yeah? And all the programs that can arise around that, the patterns of agitation, anxiety, and we see these are all constructed, all of them constructed, and they're not bad, but they're constructed. We just see what that's constructed, then what's left? What am I? What's left? Right, just the question is just the question just fades out. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean anything. And that fading out of that question, that topic, feels like a weight off the mind. Right? The measureless mind, or the unmeasuring mind, sometimes referred to as these, sublime states of loving kindness and compassion. And of course, one could measure oneself in those terms too, as I'm not very loving, I can't do compassion, my mudita is a bit feeble, equanimity doesn't have arisen. So we can do some measuring around that. But what if we just stop measuring self and tune into stress, change, and self? And which of course is straight Buddha Dhamma, anicca, dukkha, anicca, anatta. Stressing, and how that is bound up with a sense of self, and how the wisdom, relief or release of wisdom is very much associated with getting perspective on dukkha, contemplating change, and through that the sense of self not being able to crystallize. Yet, of course, things go on, don't they? We're still here, or something's here. I always call that open presence, or because it's pretty non-bland statement. I don't really consider it an attainment, I consider it a relief and a benchmark, something I can, takes the weight off, takes the pressure off, takes the self out of the picture, and from this there's a freedom to do and tune in to the good, the beautiful, the true. What a privilege, what a blessing. I'm satisfied. And that sense in which you will continue to notice how the sense of self and suffering arises, and it's like the citta seems very highly attuned to negative impact. In other words, things that are dissonant, the citta has a very fine tuning into that, very easily triggered by things being dissonant. And then when it triggers, it starts to shake, and it starts to crystallize into negative states. Citta doesn't very often tune into the non-dissonant. It takes a little bit more. You've always got to lean against the default pattern. At least I do, or had to. The non-problematic doesn't grab me. It's the problematic that grabs me. The things going their own way contentedly doesn't really seize my attention. The mess, the stain, the breakage does. The kind of peacefulness of the community doesn't really... I can notice it now, but what I would notice is dissonance, arguments, contention, whenever that breaks out, which is actually very rare these days. It just seems to default, to tune into, or to be sensitive to dissonance. I suppose it's a kind of defense system that we've inherited as creatures, to be aware of that which could cause you harm, so get immediately how to run away, or block it, or defend oneself. It may be just this primal instinct that's become a psychology because of the amount of emphasis on being better and the amount of criticism and ostracism that comes from not being able to keep up or be accepted, social rejection. So we're tuned into that by default as human beings. So you recognise this is what's going to be going on. It's what's going to be going on. Everybody's an outsider. Everybody's on their own. Something's wrong with me. And when you get it, when you recognise that sign, you just feel a sense of, oh, sister, brother, we're in the same boat, Let's get out of the boat into the ocean, It's kind of peaceful out here, where we drop that self. What does it take? The withdrawal, and you're tuning into just this sense of presence. Embodiment gives it vigour, stability. Heart opens to it. Thinking mind quietens down to listen to it. This to me is what meditation is, what it's about as a process, for freedom, liberation, or recognition. You could say it that way. So I think I'll wrap up for tonight. You may be getting a bit restless or with this going on, but that's my offering for this evening. Thank you.